So in the month of March and now April, we've tried to have a couple focuses on stewardship. One of the reasons for that is because during this time is when we are planning our annual budgets and things like that. So we try to make sure that we are planning well and being good with planning based on what we know is actually kind of pledged to come in. And so we have Stewardship Sundays. And really, you don't hear about us talk about money any other time during the year. Mainly because we know we have this time that we can speak on the topic, and this is not about, prying money out of you. It's not that at all. It's about, hey, where's your heart on stewardship? And stewardship is so much more than just money. In fact, a couple weeks ago, we read this quote by J.C. Riley. He's a Puritan theologian, and here's what he says, and I'm going to cram it down, so I took a bunch out because those theologians back in the Puritan times had a lot to say. You think I'm long-winded sometimes? We have, my wife, it's not just me. We have all talents in God's sight. Anything whereby we may glorify God is a talent. Our gifts, our influence, our money, our knowledge, our health, our strength, our time, our senses, our reason, our intellect, our memory, our affections, our privileges as members of Christ's church, our advantages as possessors of the Bible, all are talents. Whence came these things? What hand bestowed them? Why are we what we are? Why are we not the worms that crawl on the earth? There's only one answer to these questions. All that we have is on loan from God. We are God's stewards. We are God's debtors. Let this thought sink deeply into our hearts. What a powerful thought process. Everything we have. Everything. Stewardship impacts our entire perspective of life. It corrects our perspective of ownership. All that we are and everything that we have are gifts from God and are intended to be invested in God's kingdom work, not spent on self. So this morning as we dig into our stewardship thought process, we're going to look at a few things, and we tried to come at this differently every year because everyone hears us talking, when you think stewardship, you think money, and stewardship's not about money. It's a piece of it, but it's not just about money. And so hopefully this morning we will gain a deeper understanding of it. First off, our stewardship is reflection of the heart. Old pastor once told me, if you want to know where your heart is, look at your checkbook. What are you spending money on? We can't use that statement anymore because nobody uses checks anymore. Anybody still use checks? Come on. Okay. Oh, all right. We still have a few checkbooks in the room, all right? I have checkbooks at my house. We pull them out on occasion. I can't tell you exactly where they're at. I always go to my wife and say, honey, have you seen the checkbook? I think it's in a drawer somewhere upstairs. Matthew chapter 25. Jesus is telling a parable, and here's what he says. For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country, who called his own servants and delivered his goods to them. And to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his own ability. And immediately he went on a journey. Then he who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and made another 5 talents. And likewise, he who had received 2 gained 2 more also. But he who had received 1 went and dug in the ground and hid his Lord's money. After a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with him. So he who had received 5 talents came and brought 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. Look, I have gained 5 more talents besides them. His Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. He also, who had received 2 talents, came and said, Lord, you delivered to me 2 talents. Look, I have gained 2 more talents beside them. His Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been more faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of the Lord. Then he who had received 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed. And I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, there you have what is yours. But his Lord answered and said to him, You wicked and lazy servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers and let it and bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. So take the talent from him, and so take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have abundance. But for him who does not have, even what he even what he has will be taken away. And cast the unprofitable servant into the outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. You know, a lot of times we kind of focus on stewardship. That is the passage that we have. That's where we camp there. We talk about the stewards, the 5 and the 2 and the 1 and how awful that is. But what we need to understand about this story is it's a story, but it's a common story. It's something in their society that would have been known. For example, it's not like you can get on an airplane today, travel to Florida, do business, and come back by tomorrow. That's not the way life was back then. And so if a lord who would have commerce or who had lands and they were trying to do business, they would have to travel, and the travel would take days at a time. And so the story that Jesus is telling here is a common story where the people were used to this idea of the person who owns everything to leave for a period of time and be gone for an unexpected period of time. They wouldn't know when he's coming back, but they would know this, that when he did return, he would expect that his land and his business and all of his things would be in good order. It was common. So the people listening to this parable would say, yeah, that happened and so on and so on. That happens. I see it happen all the time. Now, as we kind of start pulling things out of this parable, we begin to learn that we are all stewards. We are all managers, not the owners. Everything we have belongs, is on loan from God. We don't own those things. We are managers. And one day we will hold an account in a sense where God will say, listen, I bless you with this and this and this and this. What did you do for kingdom work? Well, it'll be a question that we will all get to answer one day. See, we are God's stewards, servants who are purchased at a great price. Paul writes to us in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, he says, or do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, whom you have from God, and you are not your own, for you are bought at a price. Therefore, glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. That last statement, spirit, that's lowercase, meaning speaking of our heart attitude. So how do we glorify God with a heart attitude? Well, that is how we approach all things, with our time, our talents, our treasures, everything that we have is on loan from God. So our spirit about that is God, it's yours anyways. And so we learn to approach life with open-handedness. Every good thing, whether tangible or intangible, comes from God and belongs to God. That's our possessions, that's our home, that's our car, that's our business. Anything God has blessed you with, your time, your talent, your skills, your knowledge, anything God has blessed you with, your money, your financial abilities, your assets, your investments, your income, anything that he has given you belongs first and foremost to him. And when we learn to be stewards of those things with a heart attitude that says, God, it's all yours anyways, God can use that. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. You see, God knows your heart. He knows the capacity in which he can work through you and bless according to that. God's looking at your heart and saying, your heart is one where you are living open-handedness, so I can pass all kinds of stuff from you. Your heart is one maybe where it's really hard for you to struggle with some things, and so I can pass some stuff through you. You see, God's looking for stewards, not owners. He's seeking to let you use some of his things. He who is faithful in what is least is faithful also in much, Jesus says. And he who is unjust in what is least is unjust also in much. Therefore, if you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in what is another man's, who will give you what is your own? No servant, he says, can serve two masters. For he will either hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Now, traditionally, we say, oh, mammon must be money. Well, that's not at all what this is talking about. This word mammon comes from this idea of, it comes from, it's this Syriac word. It's this idea of it signifies gain. So when we see something as personal gain, it can be called mammon. So it can be anything. Anything in this world that brings us personal gain is considered mammon, not just money. Maybe it's a job promotion. Not just money. Maybe it's that new car that makes us look a certain way. It can be anything we're willing to serve with our time, our talents, and our treasure, because it will bring us personal gain. And Jesus is saying you can't serve two masters. You can either chase after the things of this world, that mammon, that stuff that brings personal gain, or you can chase after me. Choose. No servant can serve two masters. Philippians chapter 3, verse 7. But what things are gain to me, these I have counted loss for Christ. Interesting way of viewing life. You gave it, I'll use it. Comes and it goes, right? Well, Paul is saying, hey, it's all yours anyways. Here's Proverbs chapter 6, verse 9. How long will you slumber, O sluggard? When will you rise from your sleep? You know what mammon is in that person's life? Sleep. Mammon can be food. Check this out. Philippians chapter 3, verse 19. Whose end is destruction, whose God is their belly, and whose glory is in their shame, who set their mind on earthly things. I don't know about you, but when I go out to eat, I want it to be good. You know what I'm saying? And so that causes me to eat at certain places and to avoid eating at other places. Yes? We're mindful of that. You realize that some people, they live to eat? For them, their God, their mammon is food. It can be anything. It can be anything. In fact, James chapter 4, verse 13, it says, come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell, and make profit. Mammon, in this case, would be money. Seeking to gain money. We need to choose who we will serve, because we cannot serve the world and God. We cannot have two masters. 1 John chapter 2, verse 15, do not love the world or the things of the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away, and the lust of it. And he who does the will of God abides forever. God's saying, hey, what are you investing in? Now, as we read this passage, a lot of times we just apply it a certain way. Well, let me make sure we understand this. The lust of the flesh, it speaks to the overwhelming desires of our brokenness. Remember the brokenness? It can be good things that we desire after. But we have a desire. I'm willing to put my family at risk so I can drive the Ferrari instead of the Pinto. The lust of the flesh. These can be sexual, it can be material, anything that does not glorify God, and the decision to seek after those things. The lust of the flesh. How about the lust of the eyes? The lust of the eyes is our brokenness, craving after the things that visually appeal to us that do not glorify God. The lust of the eyes, especially for men, cause us to crave after visual things that we should not look upon. The lust of the eyes also impacts our stewardship. We see things and look upon things and eventually become distracted in life by those things. And eventually, instead of giving back to God, we're spending what we have on those things. And then we have nothing to give back to God because we're so strapped. The phrase, the pride of life, only occurs once in the Bible, this passage. In 1 John chapter 6, verse 16, it says the pride of life, it's closely associated with the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes because the pride of life directly relates to our desires in life. The pride of life leads to arrogance, flashiness, or boastfulness. Hey, look what I got. It leads to a skewed pride in one's self. I did this. I earned this. I did these things. And God's saying, whoa, pal. All good things are from me. I gave you those things. The pride of life. It causes us to build a false trust in one's own abilities and one's finances. The pride of life. We see this in the parable of the rich fool. I'm going to tear everything down, build a bigger storehouse, and I'm just going to retire, and then he dies. Basically, it's a parable, so it's not a true story, but Jesus is telling the story to help us understand some things. He says, listen, you can't rely on the things that you already got. You can't rely on owning this stuff because it may be gone tomorrow. You hear the tragic stories of people who have built up a great, like a home, they got all their possessions in the home, and then it burns down, and they have to start over. It's tragic. But we don't know. We have no idea if we're going to have what we have today, tomorrow. We can't put false trust in those things. It doesn't belong. He who does the will of God abides forever, he tells us. Man, when we invest in the will of God, the results from that investment are eternal results. When we invest in what God is doing, the rewards, the fruit that is reaped from that, we may never even understand. The fruit, even from like next weekend, when you go out and you start talking to people in the community, you may never understand how God is using that. When we handed out all those Bibles, we were shocked at the fruit that was coming back, the testimonies of what God was doing through those families that received those Bibles. My stories that blow your mind. God can use whatever you're willing to invest. Because he's God. It's his anyways. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 6, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. So let each one give as he purposes in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace abound to you, that you always, having all sufficiency in all things, may have an abundance for every good work. The fact is in a little bit later in the service, we're going to be passing these things out. And we sent you a letter saying, hey, be praying over this thing. And instead of writing a number that we just, no, I can't do that. You should be praying and saying, God, how would you have me to invest back into what you're doing right here at Faith? This is not a thing that we just say, oh, I could give that. Here's my token 20 a week. So let's see, 52 weeks. Okay, here's my token. That's not it at all. It's God, you've given it to me. How can I give it back? That's what this is about. Good stewardship requires a fresh perspective of impact and multiplication. For example, stewardship means embracing God's plans over your own. Anybody have a plan for this afternoon after church? Okay, you got plans? Going to go out to eat? Maybe you got something cooking at home already? You're probably thinking about it right now. I hope I turn that on. Mark chapter 1, verse 16, and as he walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. What was their trade? Fishermen. Then Jesus said to them, follow me, and I will make you become fishers of men. And they immediately left their nets and followed him. And when they had gone a little farther from there, he saw James the son of Zebedee and John his brother, who also were in the boat mending their nets. And immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat. Thanks, son. Left him in the boat with the hired servants and went after him. What was their trade? Fishermen. Were they good at it? I'd say so. They got some hired servants on board. It's profitable. It's a good trade. It's an honest trade. We too often relate stewardship to time, talents, and treasure, but stewardship relates to every area of life. And in some cases, like in the case of the disciples, God desires to change the very trajectory with our stewardship of our lives. You think you're going to be a fisherman the rest of your life? I got a plan for you. Would you be willing to forsake all and change trajectory of the rest of your life? Follow me. Those men changed the world. Why? Because they were willing to forsake all and follow after Jesus. That is stewardship with their very lives. I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to give God everything. Stewardship with our very life, purpose, and investment means that we are willing to release control over our very livelihood to serve the Master. Simon, Andrew, James, and John were professional fishermen. It was their family business. Can you imagine building up a business and you're offering to your son's like, oh, no thanks, Dad. What? I could have retired 15 years ago. I had a guy offer me an amazing amount of money for this business. More than it's worth, man. Professional businessmen, and Jesus shows up and says, hey, y'all, why don't you follow me instead? To embrace a different career path meant difficulty, lots of learning. And listen, they all died for it. But they were willing to sacrifice all. Follow me and I will make you fishers of men. Fishing for men would reap greater treasure, greater rewards, and make a greater kingdom impact than remaining in the boat. Church family, there might be someone here this morning. You're very comfortable where you're at. You like your boat. You're very comfortable with where you are in life. You might, well, hey, I'm retired. That doesn't mean that it's not time to get out of the boat. Listen, these disciples had to leave the boat. Hey, Dad, I'm leaving. Have a good business. You see, sometimes we're very comfortable in the boat. It's what I know. It's what I've always done. It's the way things always have been. And maybe stewardship is Jesus calling you out and saying, hey, get out of the boat and follow me. Do something different. I've known people who literally have retired and started entire ministries at 70, 75, 80. And you think to yourself, what are you doing? God called me. I'm going. They got out of the boat. They got out of the boat. Sometimes as stewards and managers of God's blessings, the Master may ask us to get out of the boat. Now, I'm not saying that we don't need lawyers. Yeah, I know I said it, lawyers. Shopkeepers and accountants and laborers. I'm not saying that at all. God can use you right where you're at. What I'm saying is this. If the Master calls and he says, get out of the boat and change the trajectory of what you're doing, step out of the boat. Because there's great reward and great blessing in that. Colossians chapter 3, verse 23, and whatever you do, do heartily as to the Lord, not to men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance, for you serve the Lord. Now, in context of this passage, he's literally writing this passage and referencing or talking to some servants, saying, hey, I can't just leave everything and go follow you and serve you because I am a servant. And Jesus is telling them, where God's telling them, listen, even in your servitude, even though you can't just leave everything and forsake everything and just follow me, that's okay. Serve where you're at. Listen, I can't just leave my job. Great. Serve where you're at. Listen, people, God will bring across your path people literally tomorrow who you are to invest in. It will be God's working through your life if you're willing to say, yeah, I'll do that. He can use you right where you're at. Man, if you're willing to serve at Walmart for God's glory, God can use that. I said Walmart, yes. If God's calling you to work in the gas station, he can use you in the gas station to change a life because you will do all to the glory of God, not because someone asked you to do it. That's why we've tried to teach our kids, listen, don't just do a task, but ask the question, how can I make this better? Why? Because you're not doing it for them. You're not doing it for us. Really, we're trying to teach them do all for the glory of God. We need doctors. We need teachers. We need grocery store employees. We need janitors. We need accountants. God can work through you wherever you are at. But maybe just getting out of the boat is you willing to open your mouth and speak truth. Point to God. Invite people to engage God on a different level. A heart of stewardship simply says, Lord, I'm willing if you call me out of the boat. Stewardship means trusting that God can use what little you have. Even the smallest of offerings. Oh, I don't have that much, and God doesn't need that. He's got someone else. No, he can use the smallest of offerings. Here's a great story. There is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes. And what are they among so many? What are we talking about? This is the feeding of the 5,000. This little guy comes, I'm going to see Jesus too. And mom says, hey, don't forget your lunch. Then Jesus said, make the people sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in a number about 5,000. We know he's talking about the men, so we don't know how many women or children were there, so it's an unknown number. And Jesus took the loaves. How many? And when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down. And likewise of the fish, as much as they wanted. This is not like, here's a tail for you and a head for you. No, as much as they wanted, the Bible said. So when they were filled, he said to his disciples, gather up the fragments that remain so that nothing is lost. Therefore they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which were left over those who had eaten. Listen. That little kid, I got my lunch. You hungry, Jesus? It's about all I can do. Let me ask you a question. What could that child have done with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish? Could he feed a couple people? I'll split it with you. You get the tail, you get the fin, you get the head. Apparently eyeballs are delicacies. I mean, what can you really do with that little amount of food? When the child is willing to let go, well, it's yours anyways. God can multiply that small token and do amazing things. Stewardship is about recognizing that, God, I will trust you with whatever I've got, no matter how small it may be, because I know you can do something great with it. When we are willing to offer God what we have, he can multiply our offering to impact the world beyond our comprehension. But we have to learn how to live open-handedly. Now, in that day, that child, we don't know what kind of home he came from. There was a lot of poverty back then. The mere fact that he had food on him, I mean, he's just a kid. Some guy going to hand me the food, kid. You ever have your lunch money robbed when you were a little kid? Bullies? You don't think there were bullies back then? Food was a commodity you wanted. You didn't always have it. But here's a child. You can take you can have this. You can have this. Stewardship means releasing control of what you have in your hand, of all that God has given us, and fully trust God's prompting to invest in kingdom work. Releasing. Let me ask you a question. Do you work hard for what you have? Yeah. Do you like it when people mistreat it? No. We always tell our kids we have nice things because we take care of the things that we have, right? When you see people mistreat your stuff, you're like, "Urgh," you know? Maybe you're picking somebody up in that nice car of yours and their feet are all muddy. Oh, would you please wipe your feet off before you get in the car? You know? Stewardship means to release control of what is in your hand and to fully trust God's prompting to invest it in kingdom work. You know, at age 40, Moses fled Egypt. Why did he flee to Egypt? Because at age 40, he's walking along. He sees this Jew, basically, this Israelite, being beat. And so he gets involved and he kills the Roman guard, right? Gets him in some trouble. So now he's fleeing for his life at 40 years old. Man, at 40 years old, I don't want to be starting over, but he fled for his life. And so at 40 years old, he flees. He was 80 years old when God reached out with a burning bush opportunity. Now, if I see a bush on fire, I'm going to put it out. Moses, he's up in the wilderness, and he's kind of like, dude, what is that up there? And he's staring at the bush and just doesn't stop burning. He's like, that's strange. Somebody's telling me yesterday that they were helping out someone's house. They accidentally caught a bush on fire. Wasn't his bush. Burning bush moment. Age 80, Moses had established a new life. He established a new family. He was married now. He had kids. And God shows up in his life. He says, hey, got a plan for you. It's time to go back to Egypt. Now, Moses got a lot of questions. So in Exodus chapter 4, he says these words. And Moses answered and said, but suppose they will not believe me or listen to my voice. Suppose they say, the Lord has not appeared to you. So the Lord said to him, what is in your hand? He said, a rod. And he said, cast it on the ground. So he cast it on the ground, and it became a serpent. Now, I'm not going to throw this on the ground because, well, it's not going to become a serpent. But imagine that. You kind of put a stick on the ground. Well, I'll go ahead and do it. And it turns into a 6-foot rattlesnake. Anybody find a rattlesnake yet this year? I found 2 of them last year. One of them was here. It's good times. Mike and I departed his ways. Hey, what is in your hand? He said, a rod. He said, cast it on the ground. So he cast it on the ground, and it became a serpent. And Moses fled from it. Chicken. Then the Lord said to Moses, reach out your hand and take it by the tail. And he reached out his hand and caught it, and it became his rod in his hand. That was a neat trick. That they may believe that the Lord God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to you. He's saying, hey, God, what if they don't believe me? Well, what's in your hand? Well, there's a rod in my hand. Okay. Cast it on the ground, and it turns into a snake. Whoa, a snake. Go ahead and pick it up again. Oh, okay. Hey, you can use this as kind of that saying, hey, God talked to me. Let me show you. Here's proof. God talked to me about it. Moses would use this very rod to testify the power of God before Pharaoh, before the children of Israel. Repeatedly, throughout this Exodus event, as they're kind of traveling the wilderness, God would command Moses to use his rod. It served as a reminder to trust God whenever he was handed a task. So what's amazing about the story of Moses is he carried his rod with him into the wilderness. In fact, we see this later in Exodus. So Moses went and returned to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, please let me go and return to my brethren who are in Egypt and see whether they are still alive. And Jethro said to Moses, go in peace. Now the Lord said to Moses in Midian, go, return to Egypt, for all the men who sought your life are dead. So he's taking that piece out of the equation. Then Moses took his wife and his sons and set them on a donkey and returned to the land of Egypt. And I want you to notice this. And Moses took the rod of God in his hand. Now, interesting thing about rods in the Old Testament. Culturally speaking, the rod or staff was used in the work of shepherding, but it was also symbolic of authority. In fact, later in the wilderness, when the children of Israel are in trouble for complaining, God says, collect up all the rods from the heads of the households, and you're going to put them in the tabernacle, whichever one's going to sprout or bring forth a life, like branches will grow off of it, that's who I'm going to bless. And so the rod was symbolic of leadership. It was symbolic of authority. You see, when Moses takes the rod of God into this journey, into this calling, it was a reminder, Your authority is not your own. All this stuff I'm about to give you and lead you into is not about you. It's all about me. It's all about my power. It's about what I desire to do through you. Can I ask you a question? What's in your hand, and how can God use it? Are you willing to say, this is God's? The rod of God, the job of God, the finances of God, the abilities of God, the stewardship of God. This is God's. Man, what could God do if you would learn to recognize whatever is in my hand belongs to God, and God can use this for his glory, for his honor, and to further his kingdom work? What will God do if you're willing to recognize what is in your hand? Because God desires to do something awesome in and through your life. But you've got to learn to walk around and say, what's in my hand today? Lord, it's yours. It's yours. I will use it for your glory, for your honor, for whatever you desire to do.